Hello guys, Fish767 here. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a very basic browser-based game. We're going to be using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS to do this. And we're going to start from the scratch, the very basic stuff. I'm going to go through it, hopefully teaching you guys how to actually use this language and program some type of program on your own. So the first thing that you have to do is get your preferred program editor. I like Visual Studio Code, so that's what I have open right now. You just type in Visual Studio Code to Google and you can download it, and it's my preferred editor. So then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to make a new folder on your desktop or wherever you want to store the game, and that's going to be where we're going to put all of the files and all the code, and it's going to go into that folder. So you're just going to come over here to File, you're going to go to Open Folder, then you're going to find it wherever it is. So mine's right here. So I'm just going to open it, and it'll come up, and if you want it to be an empty folder, so then it'll have this welcome screen. We can just get rid of that, and then you're going to click on this big long rectangle right here. So make sure that you have this Explorer open, and then you want to click right here, and so we can make folders and files straight from Visual Studio Code. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make two folders, and we're going to call one of them JS, and that folder is going to house all of our JavaScript files. Then we're going to click back to the big rectangle and make another folder, and we're going to call it CSS, which is going to house all of our cascading style sheet files. So let me explain really quickly what the three different languages that we're using are and what they do. So we're going to use HTML, and that basically is going to be what the viewer sees of our program. It's kind of like the skeleton of everything that we're going to do. So without it, nothing else works. The program won't be able to stand. But what it essentially lets us do is it lets us make a web page, and so that's what we're going to use it for. So you want to just create a new file once you're outside on the big box. You're going to call this index.html, and this is going to be, once again, our skeleton. Then the JavaScript is the brains of the operation, and what it's going to do is it's all the live code that we have inside of our browser, and it's going to essentially be the game part of our game. And then you have the cascading style sheets, and what CSS is, it's basically the skin of the game, if you will. It gives it its colors, it tells it where things are supposed to go, and I guess it's more like the DNA, almost, of the program. But you need the CSS to make things look good, otherwise it'll just be a messy blob. So once you have the index.html open, you're going to type in DOC, and it'll bring up this abbreviation, so just press enter and it'll autofill, and we're basically going to leave this. So right here where it says document, this is going to be the title of your game. I'm just going to call mine tutorial, and then in the body is going to be everything that appears on the screen. Below the body tag, we're going to link our JavaScript files, and in between the my bad. Right before the title, we're going to link our CSS, which we haven't made yet. So go ahead and click on the CSS folder and make a new file. We're going to call it styles.css, and that'll create an empty file that we're going to put all of our styles into. So then what you want to do is come back over here and type in link, and then you want to find the link CSS. You're just going to click it, and then where you see the href, you're going to take and highlight everything in the parentheses and replace it with css-styles.css. And it should pop up and you can just autofill it. And what this will do is it tells this document that when we open it, we want to load whatever is in our styles.css file. And basically it'll take it and apply it. So that's the general idea. Then you want to come back to your JavaScript, create a new one. We're going to call this one game.js. And then you have to link it. So come back to the body. You're going to make another, less than sign. Then you're going to type in src. So then we're going to have a script tag, essentially. And what you want to do is, I did something wrong. That is what I did. Hold on. Just type in src, or scr. That's what you want. Okay, then you can find the one with the src equals. Then we're just going to type in the js/game.js. So there you go. I like to make my things look pretty, so in between the body and the HTML, I indent my script tags. You can do that using the control and square bracket, the right square bracket, and that will indent it forward one. Using left square bracket will indent it back one, which is really useful when programming, and I recommend that you get used to using those to indent things. So we're going to come to our game.js, and we're basically going to make the beginnings of a very, very small game. But before we can do that, we have to let our game know where we're going to put stuff. So come back to the HTML thing. We're going to type in div, and what a div is, it's basically an empty container. So we can put things in here now, and we can address it. But in order for our code to know that we want to pull this specific div and we want to put things in it, we have to give it an ID. So we're going to put ID equals, then we need the parentheses. It should autofill the second parenthesis by itself. And then we're going to type in container. And that's basically going to be the ID of our thing. So then when we want to call a container, we can do that very easily in the JavaScript just by saying document.getElementById container, and that'll pull it up. So then inside of this, we're going to need 2 more containers. So just type in div twice. You got to make sure that you enter after one of them. Otherwise, it won't quite work properly. And inside one of these, we're going to make it be like a text box. That way we can put the text in there. So we're just going to give this one an ID of text box. And below that, the second one, we're going to give an ID of option container. And I'm going to put a dash in my option container. You don't have to, but you know, it's just how it is. So then come back here and we're going to type in var. And so what var does is it says, I'm going to make a new variable. And so in order to have a variable, you have to have a name, and then you can just declare it by only having the name, or you can make it equal to some sort of value. So I'm going to go ahead and make mine equal to values, that way that we have them set up. So I'm going to have text box, and that's going to be equal to document.getElementById. And then we're going to put the parentheses, then we're going to have a quotation, and inside of there we're going to put down text box. And so what we're telling it is that whenever I call the text box variable, I want it to automatically pull up this text box that right here, the text box element that's inside of the container. And so then we can edit it straight from our JavaScript. And so we're going to put a comma, and what the comma does is it tells it that we're defining more than one variable. And after that, we're also going to do the same thing for our option container. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this code with Control-C and then paste it with Control-V. You guys should know how to do that. I'm going to square up the indent properly. And then I'm going to replace the text box. So when I highlight the first text box, I can press Control-D to highlight the second text box. And that lets me edit them both at the same time. So learn to do that. And then I'm just going to type in option container. But the issue is we had this one with a dash and a little c, so you have to edit that. But you can basically fix it up however you want. And I'm actually going to change this one to just OC because that's easy. And so these are our first initial variables. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to set up our text. And so what we're going to have is we're going to put, actually we don't want that to be text, my bad. So put a comma up here and then just type in game. And then put a semicolon. So before we get too far, let's actually work on making things look a little bit decent. So I'm going to go to my styles.css, and the first thing that you want to do is you want to type in an asterisk and then a squiggly bracket. And so what this means is we're telling it that we want to apply the code inside the squiggly brackets to everything in our HTML file, essentially. And so what we're going to tell it to do is we're going to tell it color khaki. And so what the color is it's the color of the text, and I really like a khaki color. And then we're going to tell it background color as black, and that should look somewhat decent. And if we wanted to check it, we can, hold on, where'd my thing go? Where's my open with live server? Okay, I've lost the option here. That's wonderful. You guys won't have this unless you install the thing, but it's easy for me because I can edit with it easier. So here we go. So what you have to double click on the index.html file from your folder to open it, and it'll open up here as a browser document. So then press Control-Shift-I once you have it open. That's going to open up your developer stuff. And so we have an error already. It happens somewhere. I'm not actually sure where that is. I think that's a thing with my that's a thing on my side that you guys won't have to mess with. That's a thing with the live server. But you want to open up this Elements tab, and then you want to have the console open up below it, and I'm just going to squeeze it down a little bit, but we can basically see everything that's here. So I can click on the container, and I can like see what's inside of it. I can see the text box, I can see the option container, I can see all that stuff. So what we want to do after we have this defined is we want to enter down below the last squiggly bracket, and we want to give it a hashtag, which means that we're trying to define it by an ID now, and we're going to get the ID container. And what we want to do with our container, we're going to put another squiggly bracket, but we want to basically center it on screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to go with align self, and then we're going to tell it to align on the center. We're going to give it the width of a 100%. And then we're going to give it a height of 100%. And basically this is just going to make it fill up the screen completely, and then that automatically centers it. So I guess we don't need the align self center. So what I'd recommend doing is switching that out for align content center, and that's going to center the content inside of it basically, which will be pretty nice. So if we go back to our document, I can now look here and see that it has completely filled it up. One issue that we do have is it has automatic margins, which we don't want. And what a margin is basically the distance in between the box that we just made and the edge of the screen. And we want to set that to 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to set margin 0 pixels. And that should hopefully fix that problem. Let's check. Yep, there we go. So if you click on it, you can actually see in this little styles box right here, you can see all the things affecting it. So it has no margin, no border, no padding, and then it has the inside width. And if I were to move this, it should adjust. As you can see, the number just adjusted. It went from 15 something to 14. So that's basically how it works. And so using styles, we can make it look however we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to already mess around with the text box. So we're going to do hashtag text box, and then we're going to put the squiggly bracket. And before I go on anymore, I'm going to put some text in here. So basically, if you type text in here, it'll automatically read it as text and then just input it into the code. It should. See, it has text up there. So now all I have to do is tell it where I want the text box and everything in the styles page. So what I'm going to tell it is that I want the text to be align center. So we're going to do align content. No, we want the text align center. Then we want font size. So we're going to do font size. And we're going to make that 12 pixels just to see what it looks like. I think that might be a little bit big. That's a little bit small. So change it to like 32 pixels. Oh boy. I'm sorry for the clunky keyboard. It's just what I have. So that looks pretty okay. So we're going to leave it at that. And I think something that we're going to want is we're going to actually want a margin in here, but we just want the top of our text box to have margin. So we're going to do margin top, and then we're going to put 30 pixels there. And that should make it a little bit, yeah, that did put it down a little bit. What's going on here? Well, this is interesting. So the text box margin made the container fall by a little bit, which is not what we want. Huh. We didn't want that to happen. There's a way to make it so that that doesn't actually happen. So we're going to go display, flex, and then flex wrap. That should fix it, I hope. A thing has happened, but that's not what I wanted. Oh, goodness. So, you want to move those down to inside the container. You don't want those in the everything, otherwise it gives you a little bit of an error. But there we go, that fixed it. So now everything's aligned in the center. So we really only want the align to be on the vertical. So can I switch that? Vertical align we want to be center. Middle. Okay, middle will work. And then we take out this align content center here. Now, you know what? I actually want that to be a horizontal line. You have to get it to look the way that you want it when you're doing this. And sometimes this is what takes all the time, is actually fixing it to look properly. So instead of messing around with all that junk, just do width here and do 100% and that'll fix it. And yep, there we go. Okay. So the next thing that we have to do is we have to make the option container. So we're going to do hashtag option container. Okay, then you're going to do the squiggly bracket. And now for this one, we're going to do width as 100%, but we're going to change a little bit of what we're doing. So we're going to give it position absolute, and then what we're going to give it is bottom 10. And that's basically going to put it 10 pixels from the bottom. I hope that works. Well, I can't tell because there's nothing in there, but it should work. Then we're going to give it a height of 180. 180 pixels, and that should make it look okay. Scratch that. Take off the bottom 10 pixels. You actually want that to be bottom 0 pixels. Okay, so that should have fixed it. So the other thing that we want to do is we want to lop off the 180 pixels from the text box's height. So what we're going to do is we're going to do height, and then we're going to do calc. And so this is a function, and what it does is it's going to calculate whatever we tell it to, and that's going to be what it sets the height of the text box to. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a 100% space minus space 180 pixels. And those spaces are important because if you don't have them, it won't work right. So if we do that, we should see that the text box goes down 180 pixels and then the option container starts right when the text box ends. The issue that we have is we have the margin. So we also have to subtract the margin top. So that would be 30 pixels. So change the 180 to 210, and that should fix it. Looks like it does. We could tell if we gave it a border. So what we can do is we can give it a border of green. We can tell it that it should be 2 pixels wide and make it solid. And that will give us that nice border. Actually, leave it as solid. Now I'm going to copy that and paste it in down here just so we can see where things are. You can see that they line up pretty well. We have a small issue with the option container going a little bit over, and that's because we set the width on it to 100%. Or actually, I don't know why that is. I think that that's because we gave it position absolute that it ended up going over. I couldn't really tell you, but it doesn't matter. We can just delete it now that we know that it's in the right areas. And so the other thing that you want to do is you want to put overflow auto, and what that's going to do is it's going to make it have a scroll on the text box as opposed to making the text actually go into the option container, which is what it would do normally if we were to fill up too much text. So now we're going to go back to the game.js, and we're going to set this game variable that we just defined. We're going to set it equal to squiggly bracket, and so this makes it an object. And so objects are kind of special. They work like an array, which is basically a house for all your code. But along with working like an array, you can call the different values in them like they're a variable. And so that makes them really easy to use and very, very, versatile. So we can do a lot with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it equal to that object. And then we're going to put text. And then we're going to put a colon, and then we're going to put these square brackets, and the square brackets represent an array. Then we're going to put a comma, and we're going to put down options, and we're going to put a colon, and then we're going to put square brackets. And after that, we're going to put down, we need a function basically. So I'm going to call it load room, and I think that this will work, but I'm not 100% sure because I've never actually done them in here before. So what I recommend doing is actually cutting that from where it was, going down and pasting it down here. It'll be easier to understand if I put it down here anyway. So we want to just call it function load room. It should look like that. And then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to put some text in here and options here. And essentially, put a comma between those. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make this function load the room based on the text and options that we have up in the game. And then if we actually wanted to do this a little bit easier, we can put just a number, and that should fix it to make it better. And so then as soon as we load it, we want to call load room 0. And that's going to load the first thing here as soon as we tell the function what we want it to do, which we haven't told it yet. So what we're going to tell it to do is we're going to tell it textbox.innerText is equal to, and then we're going to tell it game and we're going to put a period, text, then we're going to put a square bracket, and we're going to put num. And so what this does is we're telling it that we want to set the inner text of our text box element, which is back here, to the text, value of the game thing. Essentially, we're telling it to set the inside of the text box equal to the first part of our array. And so I can explain it a little bit better here in a minute once we actually get text into the text box part of our array. So give me a second for that. Then we're going to create another function. We're going to call it create op. Oh wait, I'm in the wrong spot for this. So go below this function but above the load room, and what you're going to type in is function create op. Then you're going to put a parenthesis. We're going to tell it text and program, and then you're going to give it a squiggly bracket. So I didn't really explain this, but here's what functions are. You can tell a program to do something inside of a function, and when you call the function, the program will do whatever's inside of that function. But when you tell it what to do inside of the function, it won't do it automatically. So what we're doing is we're creating this function, which we're then going to be able to call back to. That way we don't have to write the code 1,000 times. And we're telling it to call the first part of the function right here, which is going to start the entirety of our code. And so that's what the load room function does. The create option function will do something completely different. So what we want to tell the create option function to do, I actually have to pull that up in a different workspace. Hold on. I need to pull this up. Here we go. So what I'm basically doing is pulling it up here. That way I can see it a little bit better. You know, I have a better way of doing this. Let me pull this off to the side. Let me find the file that I need to look at the code from, and then I can show you the code actually as we're going. So, where is it? Here we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click that button, and then press Alt-Z, which turns on text wrapping. And we're going to come down here, and this is the code that we need. So I'm just going to put it down here. The other thing that we need is up here. So we're going to start with a for loop, which isn't in this part. I'm taking this for loop and putting it here essentially. So we're doing let I equals 0, and so what a for loop does is it runs the program inside the for loop so many times. And so we're going to say, actually, we want that to be a 1. And then we want to say I less than 9. Then we want to say I++. And so what we're telling it to do is, as long as this is true, as long as I is less than 9, we're going to run the code inside of the for loop. And we're telling it to set I equal to 1 as soon as we initiate the for loop. And we're telling it that every time that we run the code, we want to increase I by 1. And so what this means is we're going to do the code inside the for loop 8 times, and then it's going to stop. And so this is really nice for consolidating code. So then what we're going to tell it is we want to grab the option container. So we're going to say OC, yeah, that's right. We're going to say OC.inner HTML, and this time we actually want to get the HTML. We're going to say inner HTML plus equals, and we're going to have one small issue when we do this. So let me address that right now. We're going to set the option container equal to nothing, we want that to be the inner text. Option container.inner text is equal to nothing. No, we actually want that to be inner HTML. My bad. But basically, this clears it out that way that we can put it in here. And so what we're going to tell it is we are going to create essentially an HTML div container that we're going to put a button in. That's basically what we're doing. So you have to actually type out the HTML code now, and we're going to inject it into the option container element. So we're going to start with this, then we're going to give it our ID. So one of the weird things in programming is we're going to make it as text. We have to make it as text in order to put it in there. And so when you want to have the parentheses inside of your text, you have to use that backwards bracket or the backwards slash in order to make it so that it recognizes that the next character is like a text character. It actually tells it the next character, we're not going to count it to the regular code, it is a special character. That's essentially the idea. So then we're going to put an O, we're going to put a parentheses, we're going to put 2 plus signs. In between the plus signs, we're going to put an I. So that's really important. And then right after the last plus sign, we're going to put another parenthesis. And that should fix that part. And then the next thing that we're going to give it is a class, which we're going to set equal to option. Okay, once we have this done, we're going to come down here and we're going to set int temporary code equal program. So what a let is it defines that variable, but only inside of the squiggly brackets that's in. So basically, if I asked it outside here what temporary code was, it wouldn't know. It wouldn't be defined. If I ask it inside the parentheses, it does know. So that's the important thing between a let and a variable. A variable is global, so even if I were to define a variable inside of the create option function, I'd be able to know the value of that variable anywhere in my code. If I did a let inside of the create option function, I can only know what the value is inside of that function. So they're two very different things. And if you were to have a variable name like our text box, which is a global variable at the current moment, and we said let text box equal program, it overwrites that value just inside of that function. So lets are really useful pieces of code. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create another for loop. So we're going to say for let I equal 1. And by the way, the I, since it's a let, only works inside that for loop, so we can reuse it here. And then we're going to say I less than 9. I've obviously messed something up. So I less than 9. And so what I'm doing now is I'm copying this code. If you want to pause it and get ahead there, that would be a decent idea. And if you have any questions, ask me in the comments. This is somewhat complicated. Then we're going to make an if statement. So we're saying if this is true, then do the code inside the if statement. So an exclamation point is a not. So we're saying if this is not true, do what's inside the if statement. And then we're going to get a document dot get element by ID. We want to get the options that we have. So the first option that we have has an ID of O plus I. And so that's what we're going to put there. And then we're going to check its class list. And so the class list contains all of the items classes, and we can actually look at it. And the dot contains asks us, does it have this class? And the class that we're asking it if it has is filled. Let me turn on text wrapping. Pressing Alt-Z turns on text wrapping, and it's super duper useful. So then we need another of these squiggly brackets. Then we're typing in document.getElementById. Where is it? Okay, there it is. And then we're basically going to get rid of the element. We're deleting it now because we're going to replace it. And the reason why we have to delete it is because of how we're trying to inject the code and make the button. We're doing it as text. And the only way that you can run the text is through an evaluate function, which will run the text right away, and we don't want to do that. Or we can inject it as a new element into our HTML code, which will take the text and turn it into actual code. So that's what we're doing essentially. And that's why we're doing it this way instead of doing it some other way where we actually use the option and then we just put stuff in there. Because you can do that 100%. But what we're doing is we make the placeholder options up here. So these make placeholder buttons that don't do anything. Then we're checking our placeholder buttons to find the one that's empty. We're finding the empty one, and we will be, I've actually messed this up. I have. Okay, I'll fix that mess up in just a moment. So anyway, inside of this for loop, we're checking to find a function that's basically empty. We want to find a function that's not, or an option. We're trying to find an option that has not been created. We're trying to find one of those placeholder options. And then what we're going to do is we're going to delete that placeholder option. We're going to put we're going to create the button that is what we want. So essentially we have a placeholder option, but we're trying to create a button that says when you click this button, move on to the next part of the game. So we're going to delete that empty button. We're going to put the button that says when you click this, move on to the next part of the game at the very end of all of our buttons, but we want to move it up to the front. So then we have to delete every button after it in the list. And that's what this for loop does. It goes through that and it deletes them all. That's the general idea. It works. It probably shouldn't, but it does. So we're going to use it. Document.getElementById. We want to get the option container this time. We're going to do .innerHTML. we're going to put in a plus equals. I'd recommend just copying this. Whoops. Copy that and paste it down here. It'll save you some time. And then after we have this class, after the class, we're going to type in onClick. And so this is telling it when you click this, when the player clicks this button, do whatever this says. And we're going to basically put in the temporary code right here. Then we're going to go here and add the text. And you have to put the parentheses after each one to make sure that it knows that this is actually supposed to be code. You have to put the plus signs in between that and the parentheses, so make sure that it looks exactly like what I have on the screen here. And then you're going to go below that and you're going to say if temporary code is equal to program, you have to have 3 equal signs. So what the equal signs mean is if you have 1, we're setting the value to something else. We're saying this equals this now. If it has 3, we're saying if this is the exact same as this. And if it only has 2, we're saying if this is almost the same as that. So it's the difference between 2 and 3 is not very big, but there's this very small difference between 2 and 3. Really, it doesn't matter if you use 2 or 3. I'm using 3 just to be safe. But there's minor differences between the two, and I'm not actually sure how you use them in the program, but there are small differences. So then we're going to get this document, or we're going to get an element by ID, and O plus I. And then we're going to take its class list, and we're going to add filled. And so what this is going to do is it's going to let us know that there's now code in this thing. But if you'll notice, this is how we've done it. Oh, and then go right below it, we're going to put temporary code is equal to nothing. And we want to also change the text. We're going to say the text is equal to nothing. So here's how this works. That way I can explain it properly. So when you call this function the first time, it creates 8 placeholder functions, or placeholder buttons that don't do anything. Then we're going to set this let temporary code. So essentially we're saying we have this code that we want to put inside one of the buttons. So we're going to set it equal to a temporary code thing. That way we can check whether the buttons are filled. Basically, this doesn't do anything right away, but it lets us do something later on in the code. Then we have this for loop that runs 8 times. What the for loop does is it checks, it finds one of our buttons, and it goes through each one. And so it'll look at the first button on the first time through. It'll look at the second button the second time through, the third button the third time through, etc. So it's looking at the first button, and it's saying, does this button have code in it? Does it have the filled class? And if it has code in it, it will have the filled class. If it doesn't have code in it, it will not have the filled class. So if it doesn't have any code in it, we're going to delete that option. And when you delete it, the other 7 buttons move up 1 slot. And so they will fill in the other spots. And so you'll be left with you'll be left with 7 buttons now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create that first button again, but when we create it, we're putting in the code that we want to run. When you press it, we're putting in the text that the button's supposed to have. But when we make it, it has to go to the end of the line. So our first button has now gotten the place of the 8th button. And so we have to fix that essentially. We can't have that be at that spot anymore. We need to move it back to the first spot. So once we have the 8th button, or the first button, but it's now at the end of the line, we're going to tell the button that it is a filled button, so we're going to add the class filled. And then we only do that if the temporary code is equal to the original program thing. And the reason why we do that is because that tells us that the first button is, that basically stops us from making multiple buttons. So, like I said, if we had 8 blank ones and we didn't tell it that last bit about the temporary code equaling the program and telling it to set the temporary code equal to nothing and the text equal to nothing, then it would fill all 8 buttons with the same thing because it goes through them all at once. So by telling it that we only want to fill the first one that we find that's empty with this code, we're essentially telling it that that the first one needs to be filled in with our code, the last ones can be left blank. And so then the program goes through and it deletes the blank ones and put them at the end of the line. But it doesn't put any code into them because we've set those equal to nothing. So that's the ingeniousness of this function. It's a little bit complicated, but once you see it working, you'll see the ingeniousness behind it, I hope. But we do have one small issue because we're going to call this every time that we have an option that we need to create. And so when we do that, we're going to create extra buttons every single time, and that's not any good for us. So I need to tell it that we only want to do this once. And how do you do that? And that's a pretty good question. So the good news is that we know that the option container will be empty after we, basically before we make any buttons, we'll have an empty option container. So that means that we can tell it to check if there is a button on the screen with a certain ID. And if there is, we don't run the code. So we're going to make that an if function. We're going to say if not document.getElement by ID. So what we're doing now is we're checking for the button. We're checking for a button because there won't be one if it's our first time calling it, but if it's our second or any time after that, there will be a button. And so then we don't want to make any more buttons because we know that they're already there. So we're telling it if there's not a button, we actually want to change this I to a 1. So just put a 1 there. Just going to say document.getElement, if not document.getElement by ID 0, or that should be an O1. Then we're going to put inside of that the for loop. We're going to move the for loop inside of it basically. And this should work. And so the next thing that we want to do is we're going to create another for loop inside of our load room function, and I can actually get rid of that now. So we're going to say for let I equals 0, I less than game dot options dot length, and then we're going to say I++. And inside of here we're going to create our buttons now. So create option, then we're going to have to pass it some text. So we're going to make that be options sub I sub, hold on. Now we're getting into nested array territory. So let me teach you about an array really quickly before we start messing with nested arrays, which are complicated. So if I have a basic array, the variable array, don't actually write this down, and I set it equal to these square brackets. The square brackets means that it's an array. And if I tell it that the first button or the first value in that array is 9, and then I put a comma, and the next value in that array is 4, and then I put a comma, and the next value is 8, then if I come down here and do console.log, and then I tell it to log array 1, basically, then it's going to load one of these numbers. Which one do you think it's going to load? You guys are probably guessing 9 if you've not had any experience. Well, it actually loads 4, and that's because arrays start at 0. So it's important to know that when you go into coding, that the computer will start the first value in the array. This 9, that's the 0th value in the array. So if I tell it to load array sub 0, it will load the 9. And that is how arrays work. Now, when you have nested arrays, it works like this. So you have an array, and then you have square brackets inside of that array, and you're going to have multiple of those. And so inside this first square bracket, I'm going to tell it 9, 8, 7. And then inside the second square bracket, I'm going to tell it 6, 5, 4. And inside of the third square bracket, I'm going to tell it 3, 2, and 1. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here, and we're going to get the first bracket, which is the middle one. We already know that. And then we'll put another square bracket after that, and inside of here I'm going to put another number 1. So this should grab 5 because it is looking at the array and it's saying, essentially, if you want an easy way to look at it, we can just press enter and you can look at it this way. And I think that this helps it make a little bit more sense. So this is the first value in our array, or the 0th value in our array. This is the first, and then this one's the second. And so when I tell it to get the first one, it's going to grab this one. And then I tell it from that array, I want you to grab the first value. So it's going to grab the 5. And it grabs the 5. It works completely. Now then, if I change this, the first 1 to a 0, it's going to grab the 8. So let's see. It grabs an 8. So that's basically what we're doing. This is how arrays work. And that's how nested arrays work. And when you get into lots of nested arrays, things get really complicated. But the good news is, they're very useful to have those nested arrays. So we're going to have an option, and each option will be housed within an array. And so basically we have one array, and that is containing all the options for all the different rooms. So the number of room that we're in determines the first value when we're calling our array. So we want this to be our number because that's the room that we're in. Next, we're going to have the option that we're on inside of that array. So that will be our I. Then we will have the text in the first part of that array and the code in the second part of that array. So then this should be a 0. And then we're going to put a comma, and we're going to put basically the same thing, except for we're changing that 0 to a 1. So I hope that made sense. Because we're basically having 3 arrays. It's a triple nested array, so it gets complicated very quickly. And that should create our text and our options. And so that should basically be it. The only thing that you need to learn now is how to make your game work. So you have everything that you need to make a game, except for you don't know how to do the text and stuff yet. So basically, you've got all the framework here. We just have to fill it in. So the first thing that I'm going to say is, why don't we put down, are you a boy or a girl? That's something that you commonly see in games. And we're going to put a question mark. Then in the option, we're going to have to tell it boy or girl. So remember, the first identifier in our option is the room number. So we're on room 0. The second one is the I. So this is how many options we have. And then inside of there, we have the text and we have the program. So we want the text to be boy. And then we want to put a comma right after that text, and we want to give it the code. Basically, before I go any further, we're going to create a save file. And I'll show you how to actually save stuff in the next video because it's complicated. So we're going to put S equals squiggly bracket, and then put a comma after the squiggly bracket, and that should fix it. And then right here, we're going to say S dot gender is equal to boy. Then we're going to put a semicolon. You have to have that semicolon. A lot of the other things, you don't have to have the semicolon. You have to have the semicolon here. Otherwise, it'll throw you in error. So make sure that you have the semicolon. And then after the semicolon, you're going to type in load room. And then you're going to put a parenthesis, a 1, and another parenthesis, and then put that. And then we're going to have to create the next option. So just copy that last array set, paste it here, and then change this to girl, and then change this to girl. Okay, so now if I go back here, array is not defined. I see. So let me delete that. You guys don't have to worry about that. Options is not defined. I have messed up somewhere. Game.options.length. Options, I see. So before each of these options, it has to have a game dot. Otherwise, it doesn't know what you're talking about. So that's my bad. Cannot read property null. So we have an issue at JS27. Where's our 27? It's right here. Wait, what did I do wrong? Get element by ID OC. That does not exist. So you're going to change this right here to, that should actually just be, that can just be an OC. That can just be an OC. There you go. That should fix it. Aha. Well, it's here. I kind of goofed it up a little bit. Did I have one extra? Did I have one array too many? I did. I had one array too many. So we only want it to be a triple nested array, so you should only have 3. If you have 4, then I messed it up. So there, that fixes it. Now, if you'll notice, we only have 1. We don't have 2. So I've obviously done something wrong still. So let me figure out what I did wrong. Game.options.length. Or no, game options length. That's our issue. The length is only 1. So we need to put a num here. That is my bad. Whoops, don't do that. Okay, we only want a num there. So basically what I did wrong is I took the length of the big array. So basically it was looking at how many rooms there are instead of the length of the options in that room. That is my bad. Okay, there we go. It fixed it. So now we have another issue, which is we don't have this properly styled. So let's go ahead and style it. So we're going to put a hashtag options. I didn't actually type out options, but it should be there. So hashtag options. And then inside of here, we're going to give it a width of calc. And let me pull up the style sheet from here because this calculation is a little bit complicated. I have it set up that way it automatically resizes depending on the size of the screen. So if you have a smaller screen, you get a smaller button. But if you have a bigger screen, you get a bigger button. And it makes it so that they all fit. And since it is a class, we need a period. So I'm essentially copying down this code inside of here. So we actually don't have to worry about the border. No, we do. So type in the border as well. So we want it to be a border of 4 pixels. We want it to be solid, and we want it to be black. Then what we want to do is we want to set the text align to be center, and you can change these colors to make it whatever you want. You can change the font size. You can even change the actual font if you wanted to. You could download some your own font things, and you know, by doing that, you can personalize it to be your game, because that's what it's supposed to be. And the more that you learn about programming, the easier that this will get. It'll become a lot less complicated, and I hope to teach you guys a lot more about programming as opposed to this. This is sort of a, let's get you introduced. You may not understand everything, but I want to put something on the table that we can build on later. I should probably have said that at the beginning of the video, shouldn't I have? So before we go on, we have an estimated measure here. That's what an EM stands for. I'm pretty sure it's estimated measure. I'm not 100% sure on that. But it basically bases that size on something else in the program. So it's not a guaranteed number. So you could really change that to whatever you want, but it just kind of guesses. And normally it's okay. And the user select changes the mouse cursor. It makes it so that the user can't highlight anything that is written right there. And this margin bottom and margin top are really important. Make sure that you have both. Otherwise, the calculations won't exactly work properly. And the next thing that we have to do is we have to add the height. Okay, we've got that all copied down. The next thing that we want to grab is, I want to make sure that I have proper code in the option container. So I don't. I need to set the cursor to default. Otherwise, it will turn to a hand, which we don't want. We want it to just be a default cursor. We also want to make sure that the user select is none. Otherwise, they will be able to highlight the buttons, which is not any good. We want to set the color to dark green. That background, no, that's just regular color. I don't know why we did that, but we did. Make sure that the background color is a gray because it looks really nice, and we want this game to look decent. We have the display as flex, don't we? We do not. So make sure that you put that down. Display flex. Sorry, I need to drink some water. I've been talking for too long. How long has it been? It's been nearly an hour. Okay, that doesn't surprise me. We've got the position absolute stuff in there. We don't have the text align center. You might want that. And we don't have the font size. I'm not going to worry about the font size. Forget the font size. Okay, then we're going to come down here, and we need to grab some more text, or some more code. So we want to grab the filled code. So we're going to do hashtag filled, and we're going to put a squiggly bracket, and we're going to tell it background color, and then we're actually going to put this in specifically. So RGBA, which stands for red, green, blue, alpha, and so that tells you tells the pixels what colors they should be. So we should have 4 red, basically 197 green, and 14 blue, and so that's a nice light green color. And then the alpha is the transparency, so we want it to be slightly transparent, which lets a little bit of that gray to show through, and that's really nice. And then we want to give it a nice pointer cursor, basically, which the reason why we're telling it to be a pointer cursor is because that shows the player that they can click on them, and that makes it kind of intuitive, which we want. Then we need to do a hashtag 01. I actually recommend just doing an O for now. Then you're going to have margin left and margin right. And so you're going to put down, I recommend just 20 pixels for each. And then you're going to copy this and you're going to paste it 7 times. Hold on. Let me copy this enter as well. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That should give you 8 of them. So then just come down and fill them in with these numbers. Whoa. Make sure that you back it up a little bit. Otherwise, you'll be on the wrong spot. But shouldn't be too bad. Okay, make sure that there's not an extra one. There's not. Okay, so now how this is going to line up is we're going to have 4 in the top row, 4 in the bottom row. So let me show you what it looks like right now. This is what it looks like right now. That's garbage. We obviously don't want it to look like that. As a matter of fact, why does it look like that? I should have fixed that, but I didn't. So it has the proper... No, it doesn't even have the proper width. So what have I done? That's dot options. We only gave it dot option. There we go. That fixed it. So, well, that almost fixed it. So basically, we're going to have 4 in the top, 4 in the next row. Once I figure out whatever is making it not look the way it's supposed to. And in order to actually get that to go properly, we have to fix the margins. So the first one should have a larger margin on the left because it is leftmost. But the fourth one should have a larger margin on the right since it's on the very last of its row. The fifth one should also have a higher margin that should actually be on the left because it is the leftmost in the second row. And the eighth one should have a higher margin on the right because it's the last one on the second row. And then we have to figure out what I goofed up with the coding. I'm pretty sure that shouldn't be 200, but it is 200. I messed something up. Well, let's go ahead and put it and see what happens if I put font size 1.3. Not quite. Wait, how big is the text box supposed to be? Okay, give me a second. I've got some number wrong somewhere, and it has goofed it up. What did I mess up? Well, since I'm not exactly sure, we're going to go ahead and fix one of the things that I had wrong. Instead of having this be margin top, make it be padding top. The next thing to do is knock this down to 180. That should fix. Minor issue. So this is 355 pixels wide, which it shouldn't be. So let's see what is so wide on this. It's 311 pixels big on this inside. That is too big. Huh. So it's the option one. Dot option. Yeah, that's right. That should be dot filled. So you have the dot. Yeah, so make sure that you change that to dot filled. What did I do wrong? So the only thing that I can think of is I'm missing something that's up here, that margin auto. Well, no, box sizing border box. There, that's it. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so once you add the box sizing border box up into this little asterisk area, it fixes itself. So now to give it a test run. So let's head back here. Yeah, I can get rid of that now. And let's add our next question. So the next one's going to be you are in a room. Okay, there we go. He's in a room. So now we have to come down to the second array right here, and we're going to put another array. Then we're going to put an array inside of that. We're going to put the text down. So we're going to just put down OK, and then the code for that text is going to be load game 0. And then we're going to have Y, because why not? Why not just let the player talk to the game? So we're going to type down Y, and then we're going to put load game 1, just to test things out. Well, yeah, just to test things out. So now if I press boy is not defined. Huh. Oh. So put a single parentheses around the boy and the girl. So if you're going to do this in the rest of your code where you actually have text like this, you have to put single parentheses around it, otherwise it won't work. So there we go. And then if we press OK, load game is not defined. I called it load room, didn't I? Also make sure that you have the functions properly named. So if we head back here and I press boy, it loads this, and if we press OK, it goes back. If I press this and I press Y, it loads the same scene again, which is what we want. So then if I press S and I look, we can see that the gender is a girl because we picked girl last, and then if I go back in here and reload S, we can see that the gender is a boy. So I can work on saving this with you guys the next episode. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. This was probably super duper confusing. And if it was, that's okay. It probably should be, especially because I went through to help make a game. So we're going to build on this, and I'm going to try my very best to answer any of your questions in the comment section, so make sure that you leave them. And I hope that my explanations were okay, and if not, once again, leave a comment. I'll get to it, and I will address your comments in the next video as well. And as we keep going, I will continue to explain these things, and hopefully, eventually, it clicks for you, and it makes sense. But that's all that we're going to hit today. And so we're going to talk about what to do next to basically allow us to save and how to access the things that we've stored in our save file, which is S. That's what I called it. And we'll look at how to use that to actually make a really good game. But that's for the next episode. So thank you guys for watching. Leave a like. Make sure to subscribe if you want to keep up with this. I'm going to put these all in a playlist. The playlist will be in the description. Make sure to bookmark that page. And you can check back there when I upload new stuff. And yeah, I think that's it. So I'll see y'all later. Bye.